Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to the 7th lecture on management organizational policies and practices. Before we start with the lecture, I would like to give you a recap from lecture 6, which was on ethics and social responsibility. To start with, we discussed what is ethics, what is the meaning of ethics, which is doing the right things and avoiding from the wrong things as per the organizational code of ethics. So right and wrong is defined by the generally accepted principles on what is desirable and what is not desirable. Then we discussed that how managers are in a position, because of their power and the authority that they enjoy within the organization, how they are in a position to influence the ethical decision making going on within the organization. So they at one step they have the discretion to make the ethical decisions themselves. It is because they are in hold of different organizational resources. If they misuse those resources, they are making unethical moves. If they misuse the company's information that is available to them, and they are the disseminators of that information, if they are not handling that information properly, appropriately, then again they are indulging into unethical behavior. Their unethical behavior can give wrong signals to the employees in the organization and promote a culture which is based on unethical acts. And promote the same in the organization. So one, with their own actions, the managers can influence the behavior of others, and two, they can directly ask their employees or subordinates to act unethically by, for example, misreporting the numbers, by misrepresenting the figures, and so on. Then managers can also be unintentionally behave unethically by making such policies that force the employees to behave unethically. So with the help of a few examples, we discussed that how certain organizational policies, such as the commission-based, the performance incentive systems, which are based on the commission, in which the commission is based on the number of sales that the employees are making, that is unethical because it makes the employees sell more and more products or services and compromise the quality. Right, and it can make the customer suffer. So that is an example of how the management has made the policies which are forcing the employees to behave unethically. Then the managers, they can give some targets which are too realistic and which are too idealistic or too optimistic to the employees, which force them to behave behave unethically. And the employees, since they know that the managers have the coercive and the reward power, therefore it is the employees managers discretion that they can punish the employees in certain ways, and they can reward the employees in certain ways, and thus it makes the employees it makes obligatory on the employees to follow the orders from their managers. Then we discussed the concept of the workplace deviance, that how the deviance, that is the doing the acts that are unethical, how it is counterproductive, and what are its consequences for the organization, what are its consequences for the person, and what are the different forms of organizational deviance, and what are the different forms of personal deviance. Under organizational deviance, we discussed the concept of production deviance, and we discussed the concept of property deviance. Under personal deviance, we discussed the concept of political deviance, and we discussed the concept of personal aggression. Then we had a discussion on the influences on ethical decision making. We discussed that what are the factors that can be the determinants of ethical decision making, how an employee, what are the guidelines behind making a decision which is going to be ethical or which is unethical. First, we discussed the concept of ethical intensity, that it depends upon the ethical intensity of the decision, and there we discussed a number of factors that determine the ethical intensity of the decision, such as the social consensus, the proximity of effect, and so on. Then we also discussed the moral development of the manager, that how the manager can be in the premature stages of the ethical or the moral development, or how it can be in a mature stages of the moral and principle development, where he has his own principles, he has his own guidelines that are on the basis of which he is making the decision of right and wrong, and he is acting in certain ways and he is not acting in certain other ways, even if that is unlawful. If he believes that he is that a certain action by the manager is lawful, is ethical, it may not be legal, but the manager will perform that action, or he'll make that decision because that is in line with his principle of ethics, and his moral development is at that mature stage. So we discussed the different stages of the moral development, which was the pre-conventional, the conventional, and post-conventional stage of the moral development. And we also saw that how the employees basically make the decisions that are of selfish nature when they are at the pre-conventional stages of moral development. In the conventional stages, they are making the decisions which are influenced by others, and in the post-conventional stage, they are making the decisions because they are their own principles of ethics. They're coming from their own principles of ethics. Then we discussed the different principles of ethical decisions, right, in which we discussed the principle of long-term self-interest, we discussed the principle of individual rights, and we discussed a couple of other concepts, the decision of how the ethical decision making is made, under what domain it is made. Then we also had a discussion on what can be the practical steps to ethical decision making, and we saw that how the organizations can introduce the different tests, such as the integrity test and the personality based tests, at different levels in the organization to promote the selection and hiring of only those employees which are ethical, or which are more prone to ethics, who have the personality traits that they are more oriented towards making ethical decisions. So some individuals, by their personality, they are more oriented towards making unethical decisions. So this introduction of these kinds of tests, with the help of research and with the help of the data, with the help of a few graphs, we saw that how these tests are related to the probability of hiring the right people who are more ethical. We also had a discussion other than this on how the organization's ethical climate can be promoted in order to promote ethical decision making in the organization. What is the role of the top management, how the top management's commitment to the promotion of ethics or ethical climate in the organization can produce better and more positive environment, ethical climate in the organization, and it can promote ethical decision making, right? And we discussed the role of the individual himself as well. Let's get back to today's lecture, which is on organizational stakeholders, social responsibility, and we will also discuss the importance of planning that is done by the managers. What are the learning outcomes for this lecture? We'll be, after hearing to this lecture, you should be able to understand what are the different organizational stakeholders. 2, you should be able to understand that to whom the organizations are socially responsible. Then 3, for what the organizations are socially responsible, you should also be able to understand how organizations can choose to respond to societal demands for social responsibility. Then our next learning outcome is you should be able to understand whether social responsibility hurts or helps an organization's economic performance. So the linkage of ethical responsibility, social responsibility with the economic performance of the organization. Then you should be able to discuss the different costs and the different benefits that are associated with the planning. You should be able to describe how to make the plans that work. You should be able to discuss how companies can use plans at all management levels from top to bottom. And lastly, we should be able to describe the different kinds of special purpose plans that companies use for change and contingency and product development strategies. Okay, let's start with the concept of stakeholders. Before actually going to the concept of the social responsibility, since I thought that it's important for you people to understand the concept of stakeholders. So that is why I included a few slides on stakeholders, on the organizational stakeholders. Stakeholders are basically the individuals who affect and are affected by the strategic outcomes achieved and who have enforceable claims on firm's performance. So Stakeholders are those individuals who are not only affecting the organization but who are also affected by the organizational outcomes in any way, right? And they have direct enforceable claims on the firm's performance. All those people, all those individuals, they come under the umbrella of organizational stakeholders. And how these people can influence the organization? They can influence the organization through their participation in the organizational processes, in the organizational performance. And then, of course, related to this, it is important to know that not all stakeholders, they can influence the organization equally, because not all stakeholders have equal participation in the organizational processes or in the organizational procedures or outcome, or in any way not all stakeholders are equally participating in the organization. Therefore, their relative importance and their relative influence on the organizational processes, that really depends upon the key relative strategic role that they are playing when it comes to the functioning of the organization. Stakeholders can basically be classified into a number of categories broadly. So, one, we can have the capital market stakeholders. Two, we can have the product market stakeholders. Three, we can have the the organizational stakeholders. And lastly, we have the general public as a stakeholder. So the first three categories of stakeholders, we also call them as primary stakeholders. And the last category of stakeholder, that is also termed as secondary stakeholders. Then the objectives of various stakeholder groups often differ from one another. How do the objectives of these different stakeholders differ from one another? We are going to have a discussion on this in our future slides to understand the concept better. First, let's have a discussion on what the capital market stakeholders precisely are, and what are their requirements, what are their purposes, and what are their demands. So most obvious stakeholders, they are the shareholders, right? So the shareholders are, of course, capital market stakeholders. They can also be termed as the shareholders. Shareholders are basically the people who are investing in the firm, right? They are investing their capital in the firm with a view to have return on that investment from the firm. So their interest in the firm is that they're expecting some return from the firm on the investment that they are making in the firm. These stakeholders or these shareholders, they can both be individuals and they can be corporate clients. Now, of course, their relative investment is going to vary in the organization or in the firm depending upon their individual stakeholders or depending upon their organizational stakeholders. Their expectations from the organization are also going to vary if they are individual stakeholders and if they are corporate stakeholders, right? So if, for example, an individual shareholder has some shares in an organization or in a company, what it would be interested in, it would be interested in short-term benefits, in immediate outcome. Individual shareholders normally want to see immediate outcome in the form of the dividends that he starts receiving from the company, so that he's sure of his investment, and is sure of that the returns have started coming on his investment, and he feels more safe and secure, and he feels less risk. So because that is the orientation of the individual shareholder is different from the orientation of the corporate shareholders. So the shareholders, they basically want a maximum return on their investments, whether they are the individual shareholders or they are the corporate shareholders. They want the maximum return, and but with respect to the investments in research and development that a firm is making, the orientation of two shareholders might be different. Individual shareholders, they might be more interested in the fact that company makes less and less investments in its research and development, so that its outcomes are its targets and its investments are short-term based, and its outcomes start appearing in the short run, and the stakeholder gets the share of that outcome. But on the other hand, the objectives of the corporate stakeholders, they have more long-term vision, they have more strategic plans, and they have that strategic vision. Therefore, they might want the organization to invest in its research and development, so that as a result of these long-term investments, the returns can also be higher, and maybe the organization can in the long run build up and come up with those advancements in the technology as a result of its research and development, and as a result of its long-term investments, it can come up with the products that can be beneficial to the organization in the long run, and as a result the corporate stakeholders can also benefit from that long-term direction of the organization and the long-term orientation of the organization. So here we see that how the interests of the two capital market stakeholders are differing, right? Because their strategic direction is different, because their vision is different. That is why their expectation from the organization is also different, right? And major suppliers, or major example of the main example of the corporate shareholder is the banks, who are really providing you the debt, right? Or a major amount of capital who are financing you. They're financing your equipment, or they're financing your machinery, or anything, right? And so here we see that this is a challenge for the organization, how it has to bring a nice balance between these two types of shareholders. Of course, dissatisfied shareholders, what they would do, they would start to limit their participation in the organization activities in the organization by starting to limit their investments in the organization. They don't purchase the shares of the organization anymore. They start reducing their stock with the organization, and they can completely withdraw their participation from the organization. And the capital markets shareholders, what other thing they can do is that they can restrict their covenants on selling, or they can sell their stock altogether again, or they can impose stricter covenants. For example, the banks, who is a very major and very important shareholder to the different institutions or to the different firms, what it does is that it advances the loan to the organizations against some property or against any other collateral, right? And if the bank believes that the organization is not doing very well, then it might start to increase the covenants on the organization, right? And it can take a number of other steps which can restrict or which can limit the participation on the organization. And the banks, in the first place, they only advance the loan to the company when it is performing well, and when it has good chances and good forecasts to perform good and to have some above average returns in the future. So the firm's reaction, it depends on the degree of its dependency relationship with the capital market stakeholders. Now, of course, the firm has a much higher dependency on the banks or on the corporate stakeholders or on the other firms, the mutual investment funds and the other firms. It has much more dependence on that kind of corporate clients than it has on the individual investors, right? So it won't that much strategically or heavily affect the firm if the individual shareholder withdraws his participation than if a bank or some other major shareholder withdraws his participation. That is going to more adversely affect the strategic objectives and strategic orientation of the organization. Then we have the product market stakeholders. Product market stakeholders, they basically include the primary customers and the suppliers of the company. The product market stakeholders, we can also include the distributors of the company, right, and the vendors. So if we take the example of the customers and suppliers, they of course have their own diverse interests in the organization, right, and they also want to safeguard their own interests in the organization. What can be the interest of suppliers from the organization? Of course, the suppliers, they are supplying the raw material or any other unprocessed goods to the organization, right? And what they want is that they want higher return for their raw material or for their products or for their deliveries from the organization. That is their interest. They want a good price. And what do the customers want? Of course, customers want better quality at a lower price, right? And if they won't get it they will withdraw their hands from that company. They will withdraw their participation from that company by just switching to another producer of the same product or service, or a substitute. They will start looking for substitute product or service. So that is how, if the customers, they are not satisfied, that is, they are not valuing the product or service, they are not viewing appropriate value which is worth the price or the quality of the product, they will not compromise, and they will start finding another substitute for, or another firm who is producing a substitute product. Similarly, the supplier, if they will see that they are not getting much value for their for their raw materials or for their products that they're delivering to the company, they will also start to find some other substitute arrangement, some other alternate arrangements for the delivery of their product service, where they can get better price, and they will also withhold their participation in the company, right? And this is what so there can be a number of reasons where the customers or the suppliers or your distributors, they are not happy with you, and this is how they can withhold their participation with your company. Here we have the example of Kmart, who is a direct competitor of Walmart. It's a very big retailer company, and it has its existence worldwide as well. So it basically, owing to some financial crunch, the company could not pay its suppliers for a couple of years. The result was that the suppliers, they asked that the future deliveries, they will be only in cash, they will not be on credit basis, and the company also feared that its existing relationship with the suppliers, that might be communicated to some other potential suppliers, and the other potential suppliers may be hesitant to engage into the business with its current with it in the future, right? So if they are if the suppliers are not ready to provide them the raw material, or to supply them the raw material because they were unable to meet their financial obligations in time, it can have a consequence directly on its products. The shelves in the retailing stores might remain empty, and as a result, the customers, when they do not find any replacement product from the firm or from the outlet, they may also start looking for substitute products from some other firms. So these are all the issues that a firm, in its relation with its product market stakeholders, can face, that can be of strategic nature, and that can be a threat to the long-term orientation of the company and long-term reputation of the company. All these issues, for example, the relationship with the suppliers that came under strain, that can also endanger the company's reputation, and that can also be pose difficulties for its long-term relationships with those suppliers, or with some other potential suppliers of the company. And if it is unable to meet the customer demand in time, then the customers may switch over to some other products, some other substitute products. So that is how the product market stakeholders, they can be critical to the long-term survival of the company. Then we have the organizational stakeholders. Organizational stakeholders are basically the employees of the company. They are, of course, very strategic to meeting the organizational objectives. All the strategies that are developed by the organization at the higher level, they have to be implemented by the first-line managers of the organization through the cooperation of employees. So employees are important resource in the organization. If the organization has very effective processes, it has very state-of-the-art machinery, it has very state-of-the-art technology, very current technology, very advanced technology, but still if it does not have the human resources, the capable human resources, it is of no use to have those processes. So complementarity of resources and complementarity with the processes is really important. They should both be coexisting for a firm to achieve successful outcomes and to achieve desirable results. But the employees, if they are not satisfied with the organization, they are not going to perform well in the organization. They are not going to give the desired level of productivity. They are not going to give the desired level of output, the desired level of quality output, and the firm's performance is going to suffer, right? And the firm needs to have some dynamic, rewarding and stimulating environment for its workforce. The firm needs to give the employees the secure jobs and smooth working conditions, and that is what happens under the labor management relations. That is the objective basically behind the formulation of the labor unions, that they try to strive for their rights from the firms. We have an example of Cisco, who had to lay off a large number of employees because of the flexibility pressures that they were facing, and they had to reduce their costs. As a result, they laid off a large number of employees, and the result was the unhappy employees. And unhappy employees can lead to drastic outcomes for the organization in the form of, as I told you earlier, not only reduced organizational performance, not only reduced productivity, but they can also lead to unhappy customers, right? So unhappy employees have been significantly reported and have been many times been reported in the literature to translate into unhappy customers. So how the employees, this is how the employees can withhold their participation from the organization if they are unsatisfied or if they are unhappy with the organization, and the consequences that the employees can cause the organization as a result of withholding their participation can again be drastic for the organization. So that is why organizational stakeholders, they are also termed as the primary stakeholders of the organization, because they can have the influence which can be very long term for the organization. Then the knowledge intensity of workers that makes them competitive weapons, and they affect the technology, the strategy implementation of the firm, whether it is effective strategy implementation or it is not at all, depends upon the employees, the willingness of the employees, right, and the ability of the employees. Then we have the general public. Lastly, they are the secondary stakeholders, the public or the general public or the media. So and there can be different public stakeholders, such as the public health, the safety and protection, conservation of energy and materials, the environmental laws, etc. They're all the media or the general public stakeholders. How can the public or the media affect the organization? Of course, they are not really very strategic, or they cannot affect the organization as strategically as the other primary market stakeholders affect the organization, or the kind of influence the primary market stakeholders has on the organization. But still, these stakeholders can also have considerable influence on the organization. So that can be short-term orientation of the organization. I have a few examples here. One is that of tuna sandwiches that were very common in America in the late 1950s and 60s. So what happened was that lots of children and lots of people, they were diverting towards this tuna sandwiches, but there was a group of environmentalists who responded to this increasing trend of tuna being used in the sandwiches by saying that when the fishers, they catch the tuna by putting the net, they also catch the dolphins, right? So as a result of which the this tuna fish and the tuna sandwiches, they were protested against by the environmental groups. Then we have the example of Gillette. Gillette produces razor blades, etc., and it tests and a number of aftershaves and other lotions. So it tests its products on the rats and rabbits. It was really protested against that it should not test its products against rats and rabbits by the school teachers, and the school teachers ask the students to write letters to Gillette. In response to those letters by the school teachers, the Gillette management responded that if they do not make these tests on rats and rabbits, it can be to the general harm for society at large. So their products need to be scientifically tested on animals before they are placed in the market for the use of the general public. Then we also have a case of 81-year-old woman who threw very hot coffee at 180 degrees from McDonald's on herself and went into the third generation injury of her skin, where you need to do the you need to graft your skin grafts. You have to undergo that surgery. So this woman was paid $2.9 million on account of this injury that was that she suffered from as a result of very hot coffee from McDonald's, and subsequently there were a huge number of complaints to the McDonald's that the coffee being offered by it at 180 degrees is at least 20 degrees higher, hotter than it is being offered at other restaurants. Resultantly, McDonald's they reduced the temperature of their coffee, and secondly, they also started issuing warnings that this coffee, it can cause injuries to the skin, second order and third order injuries to the skin. So this is all these examples, they basically are showing that how general public and how media can influence the organizational strategies. So what are the different implications from these stakeholders and from these shareholders for the organizations, for management of the organization, for the top management and for the decision makers? One, the top management and the decision makers, they need to understand the strategic, they need to identify who are their primary organizational stakeholders, right? Because the primary stakeholders or the organizational stakeholders can be different for some organizations than for other organizations. Some organizations, maybe they do not have the supplier as their primary stakeholders because they are producing the raw material themselves by way of integration. They are also producing the raw material themselves. They do not have any the suppliers as a stakeholder. But on the other hand, they can have the capital market stakeholders as very major, very influential stakeholders, because maybe they have done all their machinery and all their plant and everything that has been financed by the capital market stakeholders. So they need to identify who are their primary shareholders, who are their primary stakeholders, and what are the relative influences, what is the relative power of these shareholders, what effects they can make on the organization if they withhold their participation in the organization, and how the firm has to prioritize those shareholders and how it has to satisfy those shareholders, and how it has to attain a balance between the short run and the long run challenges that the firm faces by the different natures of demand of these different shareholders. So the firms that are earning above average returns, they can of course easily satisfy all their shareholders compared to the firms who are not earning good returns. Right? They might have to make a trade-off, and they might have to minimally satisfy the different shareholders. So in the event when the firms cannot satisfy all of their shareholders, they're not earning good returns, in that case they also need to make a choice between which stakeholders or which shareholders they can afford to lose, right? And whose support they can afford to lose. So to whom an organization is socially responsible? That is a question. We have two models. One is the shareholder model and the other one is the stakeholder model. Shareholder model basically talks about maximizing the profits of the company, and the stakeholder model, it talks about satisfying the interests of multiple stakeholders. According to the shareholder model, shareholder model was basically given by Friedman, who is a Nobel Prize winner, and he was an economist and a Nobel Prize winner as well. So this model was basically extended by Friedman, and he says that it is not the role of the managers and it is not the role of the corporations to work for the betterment of the society at large, or to work for the social causes, or to promote the social causes, and to work in a direction such so as the sense of community can be promoted. It is not the work, or it is not the responsibility of the manager and of the organizations. So according to this view, or according to this school of thought, managers are only responsible for their shareholders. They're only responsible for maximizing their profitability and their returns, for gaining efficiency. So the view also says that if you spend your time, money and attention towards protecting the rights of the general public, or towards working for the social causes, then it will undermine your own market efficiency. How your market efficiency is undermined when you're working towards these social causes, this view explains that if you start spending some amount of money on the social causes, what happens is that you're left with lesser money for making the investments in your own projects, or you're left with lesser money for hiring the very skilled workforce. Of course, the skilled workforce is very expensive, and it means that if you're having lesser pool of money, it means that you cannot spend that much on hiring the skilled labor force, as a result of which the lesser skilled labor force will result in giving lesser quality output, lesser productivity, and that will ultimately lead to increased costs and lesser efficiency for the organization. Similarly, if you have lesser pool of resources, you will be left with lesser money to purchase the quality raw material, right? You will start purchasing the substandard raw material, and to save the costs, and as a result, again, the quality of your product will suffer. Right. So when the quality of your product will suffer, as a result, your sales will suffer, and when sales will suffer, then your profitability will suffer, and your market share will be lesser, and your profitability will be lesser. When your profitability will be lesser, you will be giving lesser dividends to your shareholders. They will be lesser satisfied, and their overall quality of life will also deteriorate. On the other hand, if you spend all that money only on your business but not on other social causes, as a result, you're going to perform better at the level of the organization by having more satisfied employees, by having more satisfied customers, and having more satisfied suppliers, and so on. When you will be maximizing your shareholder value, as a result, all the different stakeholders involved in the company they will be more satisfied. Your shareholders will be more satisfied because you'll be giving better quality output at lower prices. You'll be producing more efficiently. As a result, your shareholder value will maximize, and these people, these shareholders, they can subsequently, from their individual pockets, they can make investments, they can make the decisions, or they can make the choices on where in social causes they have to invest, as per their own considerations, or as per their own likings and dislikings. But organizational role is to maximize profit and is to maximize shareholder value. Then it is up to the shareholders that where they spend their money, on what social cause they spend their money. So that is the view, the shareholder value view, and in contrast to which we have the stakeholder model as well. According to the stakeholder model, the organization is responsible not only to these factors, not only to the shareholders, but it is also responsible to all the different stakeholders that the organization has at large, and it is also responsible to the general public. We have already discussed in the previous slides the concept of different stakeholders and the power, their relative influence they have, and their interests, and how the organization needs to balance the interests of the different stakeholders, which are both the primary and secondary. So organizations' social responsibility is, according to this model, highest on achievement of profit. So if you see that highest share of the pie goes to the economic side, that the organization is mainly responsible towards making profits, then the second highest level of responsibility of the organization is to obey the laws, so to obey the legal framework that is prevalent in the country, or it can come from there can be international laws that the organization needs to abide by, and there can be government and local laws or the federal laws that can be that the organization needs to abide by. And then the next share of pie goes to the ethical responsibilities, that the organizations, they should not violate the principles of right and wrong. They should make the decisions which are ethical. They should behave ethically, and they should behave responsibly when it comes to the ethical decision making. And then the last share of pie is that of discretionary, that is the social responsibilities that the organization has, right? That is towards the general public, or towards the betterment of the general community, and so on. So the different organizations, they basically respond to demands for social responsibility differently. Some organizations, they have more of a reactive strategy. Some have more of a defensive strategy. Some organizations, they follow the accommodative strategy, and some organizations, they have the proactive strategy. Under the reactive strategy, what happens is that the organizations, when they are asked by the social or the general public stakeholders, they are pointed out against some act by the organization, they are trying to fight all the way. They are just being reactive, right? They are defending their position, and they are not taking any step to work for or against that situation or problem, right? In the defensive strategy, they are basically defending themselves. The organizations are defending themselves, but they are doing minimally what needs to be done, or what is required to be done, or what is the demand of the organization stakeholders. The general public or the primary, secondary stakeholders, they are doing minimal of that. And under accommodative strategy, they are more being progressive, the organizations, right? They are basically trying to fulfill the demands by the general public or by the society in response to their ethical stance. And then we have the proactive nature of organizations as well, who have this strategy of being proactive. What they do is that they lead the organization. Proactive organizations, they are even before there is some they act in socially responsible ways even before they have been pointed out by general public or by media or by any other secondary stakeholder or the primary stakeholder. They are acting proactively. So here we also have the example of McDonald's, that the McDonald's introduced its system of the recycling system in America, a recycling program where it advertised in the newspapers that it wants the products or the raw material from the companies, the recycled raw material from the company that was for the promotion of the environment, safe and healthy environment, and the environmental safety, for the promotion of the environmental safety. Then, so the McDonald's has a very successful recycling program, right, and which was very innovative and which was very proactive approach on the part of the McDonald's, and it spends around $250 million on this recycling program, which only buys recycled raw material from the different suppliers. Then how this social responsibility is related to the performance of the organization. There are different studies, and their findings indicate that there is no clear relationship between social responsibility and economic performance. Some of the studies, they even show that social responsibility can cost a company, just as we said earlier, that the companies, they are drawing certain amount of money, and if they are just investing in certain social causes to promote the environment or to promote a general sense of community or for any other social cause, in that cases they don't have any rewards for that, that use of money in that direction, right? That they can cost the company sometimes they can even pay the company, and sometimes such kind of spendings, they can generate profitability as well for the company. So we have all the three kinds of evidences. The firms, if they want to be socially responsible, if they want to act those ways, they should act those ways without concern for performance, or without the incentive of getting higher performance from their performance of social responsibility acts. Social managers therefore need to understand that social responsibility may not lead them to higher performance, but still they should act in ways that are socially responsible. Then we have our next topic for today's session, which is the planning. We'll be discussing the different benefits and the pitfalls of planning, and the various types of plans, and the top-down plans, and we'll also be discussing the scenario planning and special purpose planning. So what are the different benefits of plans? The first benefit of plan, as it has been reported, is that it increases the effort or intensified effort. If a manager in a company, if you as a manager in a company, if you give the same work to two employees, right, and if you ask one employee to improve his productivity over some time, and if you ask the other employee to sell 2 sticks every day, who in your opinion is going to show better outcomes? It has been reported that the worker who has been given a target to produce or to sell 2 sticks in a day, he will be spending more effort, more energy and more time in fulfilling that target than a worker who has just been given a loose target of increasing his productivity over some time, right? So if you plan things out, it has been reported that employees generally work harder to achieve those plans than if there is no direction, if there is no plan at all. Then planning has also been associated with the persistence. The people the people who plan, or the people who follow certain plans, they are shown to be more persistent on their work, and they have more long-term orientation of their goals, of their tasks. Even if the short-term goals are not being met too much, they are still persistent. They still continue their effort to achieve their goals in the long run. So the planning encourages persistence, it has been reported, and it has also been reported that the planning gives a sense of direction to the employees on which activities they have to put their energies on, where they have to spend more time, how they have to prioritize different projects, what is the nature of the different projects, right? how some projects are more strategic than the other projects, and in which projects they have to spend how much amount of time and their energy than other projects, right? And which projects or which activities they have to avoid. So what is their do list, what is their don't list, how they have to prioritize their do list, that all comes with planning. It gives you direction. Another benefit of planning is that it gives you it gives you a number of strategies. You think of a number of strategic options that you can utilize to do a certain to fulfill a certain plan. For example, if you have a plan in your mind, then of course you will exercise certain strategic options that how you have to reach there. What can be different possibilities that you have to reach there. So you think through a number of task strategies that you can attain, and then you choose out of those strategies. And the best thing about planning, and the highest or the biggest benefit of planning, is that it has been reported to work. The companies, the organizations, and the individuals who plan are reported to show better performance than the organizations and the individuals who do not plan. Planning has been linked to performance empirically. Then we see that what are the different pitfalls of planning. It's of course not that planning is 100% beneficial to the organization, or it is the cure to all organizational problems. That is not the case. Planning has some pitfalls too. The first, most important pitfall of planning is that it impedes change and it prevents adaptation. A number of studies have reported that those organizations that plan, they are not as responsive to the environmental changes as the organizations who are following the emergent planning processes, or who are more working on the who are more responding to the environment on a day-to-day basis, on the basis of daily activities. When you are planning, just as we also had a discussion in one of our lectures where we discussed the strategic planning systems versus the emergent planning systems, where the planning is taking place, or where your employees are responding to the changes in the external environment, there are more chances that you will be more into the radical innovations, and you'll be more into the will be able to keep faster pace with the requirements of the external environment than if you are into a strategic planning process, because this process is really time consuming. It is very long process of planning, and the plans, they are normally formed at the top of the organization, so sometimes there is detachment of planners with the plan as well. Means that of course when they are forming the plans at the top level of the organization, they are not familiar with the processes at the bottom of the organization, the real problems at the bottom of the organization, whether that plan is workable or not. So most of the times it has been reported that this planning, it only becomes an intellectual exercise. Sometimes the top management is only taking help from the external consultants to make the plan, but that becomes sometimes a superficial exercise that is not linked to the actual shop floor problems, right? And also the planning is done on the basis of certain assumptions, on the basis of certain ideas, on the basis of certain information from the external environment, and on the basis of how the company has been doing in the past. So most of the time the organizations, they just make a few changes to their plans which have been successful in the past, and they implement that for their future as well. And but that's not the right way to do, because sometimes the historical benchmarking which the companies do, that this is what they have been doing in the past and this is how it will work in the future as well, that may not work actually, because the environments are increasingly uncertain, and it's difficult for sure for the managers to make the predictions. Your predictions and your forecasts can also fall short. So that is why the plans, they basically create a false sense of certainty. The managers and the plans indicate for certain that this is how your certain stakeholders are going to react in the future. Your customers, this is how you make a forecast based on your based on the historical trends and based on certain assumptions that you have. But those assumptions and that trends can fall off, and it can lead your organization to suffer. So it is really important for the planning to be successful and to overcome these pitfalls of planning that the leaders need to have a vision. They really need to see with their open eyes that what are the external environment, how the external environment is changing, what are the challenges that are posed to them from the external environment, whether they have been incorporated in their plan, the policy that they are making, how much it is in line with the practical problems at the shop floor, how much it is addressing the needs of the customers at the shop floor, how much they are taking the opinion of the employees at the shop floor who are dealing directly with those customers, right? And the planners, they need to be really close to the events. They should be able to monitor those events so that the plans that they are making, they are actually workable, and they can be implemented, and some real results they can be gained from those plans. And lastly, the plans, they need to be flexible. They must be flexible to work. We'll talk more about flexibility in our future slide. So how can the organization make a plan that works? First, it needs to set goals. Then it needs to develop a commitment to those goals. It needs to develop effective action plan, and it needs to maintain flexibility in the plan, and it needs to track the progress toward the goal achievement. So the goals that the organization sets, that should be smart. They should be smart goals. I hope you all be aware of what the SMART goals are. They should be specific, that you have to achieve this much in this much, like you have to sell 2 kg of fish in a day. Then they should be measurable. You are actually at the end of the day seeing that how much has been sold. Then they should be attainable. They should not be too high. They should be realistic. They should be easy to achieve. For example, if you go to would you like to go for an exercise plan that is saying that you need to do exercise half hour a day, or you would like to go for an exercise plan that says that you need to do exercise 3 or 4 hours a day? Of course, it's not realistic to do 3 to 4 hours of exercise a day, right? So the plans, they should be realistic and they should be attainable, because if they are not attainable and if they are not realistic, then they will be demotivating for the employees at the first step. They will not own those plans, right? And they will be demotivated to follow those plans. They should be timely. There should be some time limit as well. So if you have to reduce the 10 pounds, in how much time you have to reduce it? Or if you have to sell 2 kg fish, in how much time you have to sell that 10 kg fish or 2 kg fish? So they need to be really specific, your goals. Then commitment towards goals is really important. And your determination to achieve goals is very important. This commitment and determination, it can of course be increased through employee participation. More and more employees should be involved in this planning process and in this goal setting process. And of course the goals, they need to be realistic, they need to be reasonable, they need to be attainable. Another way of gaining commitment, or another way of increasing your goal commitment, is by way of making your goals public. Share with the significant others, share with your co-workers, share them with your parents, share them with your siblings, share them with your manager, and so on. Any significant others, you share your goals with those significant others, and that is also reported to increase your commitment towards those goals. And that's what we personally experience as well. Then the obtaining top management support is of course very important towards having goal commitment. If your top management is supportive of your goals by way of, if they are extending you certain amount of funds to fulfill your goals, or they are personally participating in your goals, or they are declaring their goals, your plan or your goals in public, that also has been reported to increase your goal commitment or the employee's goal commitment. Then developing effective action plans is really important. You have set your goals, you have attained goal commitment, and then how you have to achieve your goals, you have to jot down all those different steps that you would take to achieve your goals. You have to specify the different steps that you would take. You would specify the different people who would be involved, the different processes that would be used to fulfill that plan, to execute that plan. So how that plan will be executed, that part is covered here. Then which people will be involved, how they will be involved, will they be working individually, how the work will be organized, how the processes would be organized, right? What resources will be utilized, what will be the resource allocation, and then the time period, of course, that in how much time this plan or this goal has to be met. Then, of course, the tracking of the progress or the evaluation is really important at every step. So step-by-step evaluation of the plan that has been executed is really important, and there can be two different methods of how you can track the progress. One is the proximal goals and the distal goals, which is the you are really having an eye on the short-term goals of the company, right? Or an employee is having an eye on the short-term goals that he has. So short-term goals basically are one, they are the indicator of whether you are going in the right direction, whether you are moving in the direction of achievement of your distal or the long-term goals, and also if there are any discrepancies when you are that can also be pointed out when you are having a check of your short-term goals, or when you're tracking the progress on your short-term goals. Then we have the second method, which is gather and provide performance feedback. Of course, provision of performance feedback has been reported to really work wonders, because when you're providing the feedback to your employees, it is if there is any discrepancy in the effort that the employee is making, if there is any discrepancy in the quality that the employee is producing, and if there's any change in direction needs to take place, or any different strategic option or any different action needs to be taken to achieve that goal, that can be identified at this tracking progress step, and they should also be reported, or they should also be communicated to the employee. A proper performance feedback should be given to the employee on all these different areas, so that if they are short of performance on any of these areas, that can be improved. Then, of course, the flexibility, as we talked about earlier, one of the important pitfalls of planning is that they lack flexibility, right? And that is why they are more conducive to falling short of the external environment requirements, and the organization is more prone to being stagnant, and it's more prone to being reactive instead of being proactive, and lesser adaptive. So if the plans they would be flexible, then the chances are higher that the organization will be more adaptable and more responsive. So the flexibility there can be maintained through utilizing option-based planning and learning-based planning in place of the traditional planning. Option-based planning is when you keep a number of options, and you institute a number of options, and then you choose between the options that are performing better to achieve your goal, right? So for example, an organization investing in a number of small projects, and then seeing that which project is giving it better returns, and then keep working more or retaining those projects and dropping the others. Then we have the learning-based planning. What happens in learning-based planning is that the plans, just as we talked about, that the organization, they should not fall in a strategic drift by remaining behind the environment, by being less responsive to the environment. If it does not follow those traditional planning systems, and if its planning system is more and more learning-based, then it means that it is more open to the knowledge sharing from the external and the internal environment, and it is more open to it is continuously adjusting, or it's incrementally responding to the changes that are taking place in the external environment, and it is frequently reassessing its goals and revising its plans and revising its targets accordingly, right? So it's not that planning should be done, it should not be a one-time exercise, it should not be done one time for next 10 to 15 years, and then that policy document remains there in the paper, and you have to strictly follow that policy document, right? That should not be the case. You should continuously reassess your position vis-a-vis the position in the industry, the requirements that you need to make in your change in your plan, that you need to do that continuously in order to achieve more flexible plans, and in order to avoid the pitfalls of planning. Then we have the planning from top to bottom. Of course, that is how it is done, because this, as I told you earlier, that the top level of the management is basically responsible for developing the organizational, corporate, or the business strategy of the organization, right? And before developing that strategy, the top management, it formulates the vision and the mission statement that is formulated by the top managers. Then the middle managers, they formulate the tactical plans, or the medium-term plans, which you also call them, and they use the technique of management by objectives to follow these plans. We'll be discussing it in the future slides. Then we have the first-line managers. The role of the first-line managers is the development of the operational plans. They can be the standing plans and single-use plans that can be used. Let's see that the top managers, they are responsible for making the vision and the mission statement for the organization. We already discussed it earlier, that the vision and mission statements, how they are the enduring statements or the logical statements of purpose, and they are basically inspirational, and they state they give a direction for the organization to make its specific strategies and specific goals. So we discussed in one of our lectures how these vision and mission statements, how they are set, what is their importance, how they are formulated, what should be the important components of these statements, and how they should be effectively communicated. So that was the role of the top managers, right? Formulation of the vision and mission statement and the organizational strategy accordingly. Then the middle level managers, what they do is that they have to make these tactical plans, which is the medium term plans, and they are basically responsible that they should plan in ways, they should allocate the resources of the organizations, they should allocate the budgets, and they should help the lower level managers or the first line managers. They give them the targets, and they keep a track on the working of the first line managers, on the performance of the first line managers and their units, in ways that the long term objectives of the organization are being met. So what the middle level managers, they can do is that they can follow the strategy of the management by objectives, wherein the plans, they are being developed and they are being carried out by direct involvement of the employees. Involves their different goals, they are being discussed by the employees. They are discussed between the managers and the employees together, and then through the participation of the employees, with the will of the employees choose the goals that they want to perform for the future, right? So participative selection of the goals is taken from a number of options of the different goals, and then they jointly plan that how these goals will be achieved, right? And performance is then reviewed regularly, such as on the quarterly basis. Management by objective is a very famous technique which is used by many managers in many organizations, and it has been reported to have 97% success over the organizations who do not use this management by objective technique, right? So the companies, they perform, the companies that do not use this technique, the probability is 97%. Then we have the finishing at the bottom. Here, what we are talking about the first line managers. What is their role vis-a-vis the plans that the management has made at the top level? The lower level managers or the front line managers, of course, they are making the day-to-day plans, because they are responsible for building the short-term plans or the day-to-day plans of the organization, because they have to carry out the day-to-day operations of the organizations. To carry out those operations of the organization, these managers, they make the day-to-day plans or single-use plans. So there are a number of day-to-day plans which these frontline managers make, such as the single-use plans. They can be the standing plans, and they can also do the budgeting. Single-use plans are those plans which are made only for once, right? For example, if in a university it has to organize a workshop, right? So it will make a single-use plan on how it has to organize that workshop, right? That will be a single-use plan that will become redundant after that workshop has been organized and it's over. So it is only for the one-time events. Then you have the standing plans. Standing plans are the plans which are for recurring events, the events that are going to occur again and again in the life of the organization. So you build those plans so as you have the standard ways of acting, that how you have to behave when that event is occurring again and again. For example, then to follow your standing plans, there are three kinds of further sub-plans that you make to follow your standing plans. One is the policies, then you have the procedures that the organization devises, and then it has the rules and regulations. So for the organizational policies which it makes to fulfill the standing plans, it is, for example, it has the boxing policy for the boxers. So for the boxers, boxing is a blood sport, as you all know. So it is required by the organizations that the boxers, at the time of their selection in the organization and the initiation of their employment with the organization, they need to submit their blood test reports, right? That is the policy of the organization. And what is the procedure? Procedures are the very specific details about the policies. So what happens is that as per the policy of the company, that blood test, they should, the employees, they should not be carriers of HIV, right? The boxers, they should not be carriers of HIV. But if the results of the blood test are positive, then as per the procedure of the company, those reports of those blood tests, they are screened thrice. The same blood sample is passed through 3 different screening or 3 different subsequent tests, and each test is more expensive than the previous test, and its results are more accurate than the previous test. So 3 different screenings are done of those that blood test sample to make sure the accuracy of the results. So that is the procedure that the company is following. Then the companies can have certain rules and regulations as well, such as in certain companies, the managers, they are not allowed to give the reference letters to their past employees, because those if the supervisors, they give the negative reference letters to the employees, then the employee may sue the company for the defamation of the employee, or for the defamation of the character of the person, right? So these policies, the procedures and the rules and regulations, they differ with respect to the degree of the intricacy. The rules and regulations, they are very specific, right? And the procedures, they are also specific, and policies, they are little general. Then the organizations can, of course, at the level of the first line manager or the branch manager, he is also responsible to make the budget of the organization, right? Or the budget of that department. For example, how much resources will be allocated to which function, to which activity, to which project, how much resources you will be allocating, right? And for how much organizational resources will be allocated to different employees within the organization, depending upon their task orientations, depending upon their task responsibilities. So this is all being done by the first line managers in order to achieve the realized objectives that have been given, that have been set at the top in the strategic plan of the organization. Then there can be certain special purpose plans as well, which are used when the organizations, they need to plan for change, when they need to plan for contingencies, and when they need to plan for product development. So one example is the stretch goals. When the organization has to plan for change, sometimes the organization is doing very well, it is doing incrementally, but the organization feels that it is not doing at that fast pace as it should do, or it should it needs to increase its performance tremendously. Then in that kind of cases, the organizations, they form these stretch goals, which are too ambitious goals, and the organization doesn't even itself know that how it has to achieve those goals. Right. So in that case, Steve Kerr, who is the Chief Learning Officer at General Electric, and he was also the former dean at Southern California University Business School, and he was a management professor there. He says that the companies, they can increase their performance tremendously by following the benchmarking, by following the process of benchmarking. So what the companies can do is that the companies, they can identify the outstanding practices of other companies, right, and they can try to adapt those practices of other companies and thus improve their own performance. So they use the performance model utilized by other companies who are doing really well, and try to adapt that model to yourself. And here Steve Kerr, he also gives the example of hospitals, that hospitals, when you go to the hospital for admission as a patient, you want to take a room. Usually what happens is that their procedures normally in every hospital is very cumbersome. You really have to wait really long because they have very extensive paperwork, and the other formalities are very extensive before you are admitted to the hospital. Right. So he says that which organization or which model in the industry you can follow in the hospital to increase your performance. Right. How you can reduce your time before you admit the patient in the hospital. He says that the model that the Marriott hotels follow, that is similar to the one that hospitals follow, because the Marriott hotels also the different people come there for admission in the rooms. They also stay there in the rooms for a couple of days, or in some cases longer, and they also require the identity from those people, just as the hospital requires identity from the patients, and they also need the history of those people, as the hospital needs the history of the patients. They also need the information on how the payment will be made, such as through credit card, etc., and the hospital also needs the information on how the payment will be made, such as the insurance through insurance company, etc. Right. So Steve Kerr says that benchmarking can be used to improve your performance tremendously. In Marriott hotels, that you are admitted, or you're given a room in very, very short time of your going to the reception and asking for a room, compared to a hospital where you have to wait really long before you're admitted to the room. So what Steve Kerr further says on the stretch goals is that these are very demanding, and the employees for once don't know how they have to reach there. So the employees, they should not be gauged, or their performance should not be measured against whether that outcome has been reached or not, or that goal has been reached or not, but against their past performance. So if their past performance has really improved, their current performance has improved after giving them the stretch goal, even if that goal is not realized, but if they're performing better than they were doing in the past, then the employees, they should not be punished, or they should not be penalized for that. Then we have the planning for how do we do this contingency planning. We build scenarios when we have to do this contingency planning. I discussed this topic on scenarios a little bit also in one of my previous lectures, where this scenario building was falling in the context as well, right, when we were talking about the external environment. So here again it's coming in the context of planning for contingencies. Therefore I'll be just very shortly telling you again the different points of scenario planning. First, you need to define the scope of the scenario. Then you need to identify what your major stakeholders are, as I talked to you earlier about this. Then you need to identify what is your environmental trend, right? What are the key uncertainties in your environment? What are the major factors that are that can largely influence your organization? So who are the major stakeholders, right? And then you develop the initial scenarios based on these different factors. Those different factors, they can, in the external environment, they can play their role individually, or they can play their role together in combination. So what do you expect? So you need to identify a few key major factors that influence your organization. They should not be innumerable factors, they should be few specific factors. You identify those factors, and then you build a list of possible scenarios that can emerge, and then you make your contingency plan as per each scenario. For each scenario, you build a separate contingency plan, so that if this happens, you will be doing this, and if this happens, you will be doing this. So you also plan for product development, that is the aggregate product plans, right? So what happens in aggregate product plans is, of course, all the organizations, or any organization, does not rely on only one single product, right? To reduce its risk, all the organizations, they try to develop many products in line. But once I was studying somewhere that a manager in a company, he asked 20 employees to make 150 projects. So that is a lot, right? 150 projects, development of 150 projects simultaneously is a lot. The organization, when it is the benefit of aggregate product plans is that when the organization is trying to make the different products or different projects for the different products, it should try to realize that which products fall within the strategic domain or within the strategic objective of their organization, which are strategic to the business of the organization, and it should only focus on those products. It should only focus on them, and then these aggregate product plans, they can help the organizations monitor these products in a better way. Resource allocation can be more effective. The allocation of facilities and the materials and the funds and the equipment and how they will be utilized, what will be the different allocations, all that can be done in a better way. Then we have the 4 keys that can lead to faster product development. One is the cross-functional teams. What the cross-functional teams can do is that, of course, in cross-functional teams, there are different employees from the different departments of the organization, such as marketing, management, finance, accounting. They are all come together and they form a team. So there's really diverse people with diverse knowledge skills. They are available from diverse functional backgrounds, are there, they come together in a team, and of course they can greatly benefit from the variety of information and knowledge and experience that they have in the different fields, and it can really foster the process of product development. Then the internal and external communication, similarly, it can have its role to play. Internal communication, when all the different team members, they are communicating with each other, they are from different backgrounds, and the sharing of knowledge can be much better, and they can tap better opportunities, or they can tap better options in which they need to act to fulfill their objectives. And the external communication is the communication of the members with the suppliers and with the customers, with the key customers, right, who can give you information on how you need to develop the different designs or different features of your product, right? But the organizations need to be really careful that sometimes what customers report or what customers say that they want this kind of product or this kind of taste in the product, that is not what they actually want, right? So that is what happened with McDonald's when it introduced its McLean burger in response to the customers' demand that they want lean chicken and they want fat-free chicken. So McDonald's introduced McLean, and the KFC also introduced this skinless chicken burgers, and the Pizza Hut introduced its low-fat burgers, low-cal burgers, but low-cal pizza. But these all projects, they were flopped. The customers actually did not like to eat them. They did not had their preferences towards them. So the managers, they really need to understand what the customers actually want. Then the overlapping product development phases, which is the third critical factor when planning the product development process. So it is in contrast to a sequential design process where each step must be completed before beginning the next step. So overlapping development means multiple product development steps and phases. They are all carried out in one go. They are all completed at the same time, so that you have a really integrated whole available to you. And then you have the frequent testing of product prototypes, which is the last step to faster product development. So a prototype, we know that it's a full-scale working model that is being tested for design, function and reliability. So a good product plan or blueprint is very essential, and a very few new products succeed without having this kind of product prototypes, right? So with this we come to the end of today's lecture. We discussed in great detail about the different stakeholders that the organization has, the social responsibility of the organization, and the planning, pitfalls of planning, benefits of planning, and the different planning options, the planning done at the different levels in the organization. Hope this session was really useful to you, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture. See you again. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.